Thank you for coming to attend this conference and this workshop on restorative justice. My name is Ron Johnson. I'm coordinator for the CRC, the Community Restorative Court, and I'm going to allow my colleagues to introduce themselves.
I'm Ismael, Ozanne, Dane County District Attorney.
Good morning, my name is Marino, and I'm the Senior Social Worker with CRC.
And Jonathan Scherrer, Director of the Restorative Justice Project at UW Law School.
So, the Community Restorative Court is a pre-charge diversion program. We work with young people 17 to 25 years old, primarily through misdemeanors and municipal citations. And we also, at the DA's discretion, sometimes do felonies. But the idea is that we don't try to find guilt or innocence for cases that we have. When the DA refers a case to us, they've already fessed up. They've already accepted responsibility for what they did. If there's a victim involved, the victim's already been vetted, and we roll through it, not trying to find guilt or innocence, but try to find out basically four things: what happened, who's responsible, who was harmed, and how can we work to repair the harm. So we're about repairing the harm and reducing risk. We involve the offender, whom we would call respondents, and the victim. We like to say that we're victim-based, respondent-focused, and community-driven. So the victim, the respondent, and the community. Community, in our way of thinking, is represented by a group of volunteers called peacemakers. And this is over 300 Dane County residents who have gone through like 16 hours of training that Professor Scherrer presents. And so we have an army of seriously minded, trained people who come from all walks of life, who are involved in this on a voluntary basis simply because they want to make a difference in their community. They want to have a voice in making the Dane community more inclusive and representative. In a nutshell, that's what our program is. John, would you please start us off with what is restorative justice and why?
Sure. So restorative justice is a couple things. So it is both a philosophy and an approach towards dealing with crime or harm, as well as a series of principles and practices with which we engage. And thinking about the traditional justice system, the main focus there is going to be on the person responsible for causing that crime. The main purpose of our justice system is to determine, did this person do this thing, right? And so a response is going to be based on, like, can we prove that this individual did this behavior, and then looking at what is the appropriate response or appropriate punishment that applies to this individual. So in a traditional system, again, when we think about punitive sanctions, we think about how we respond to crime, we can often talk about this idea of we sort of balance harm with harm, right? So you have hurt someone, so in some way you are going to be punished, you are going to have some harm sort of enacted on you to show that what you did isn't okay. And we're going to think about, in restorative justice, we want to flip that a little bit. And so we want to think about, all right, how do we make right what has happened? And so here in a traditional response, we have a lot of, again, professional system actors. And so the offender or the person responsible is often fairly passive in that process. They're sort of having things done sort of to them. Their lawyers are speaking for them, and they're sort of waiting for what the judge at the end of the day decides should happen to them, okay? And in a restorative process, instead, they're given a much more active role in that solution. So they're going to have to propose terms for what they think is appropriate. They're going to have to sort of voluntarily agree to do those things, and then they have to follow through on all of things in a very active way. But we're looking at harm and how do we repair the harm that has been done. So it is taking a little bit of a different approach towards responding to the same thing that happens as you might look at in the traditional system. So when we think about some of the key concepts, we think about crime, and we think about that it is really this idea of harm. And that crime is fundamentally this violation of people and relationships, harm that is done to individuals and the harm that exists between individuals and within communities. So what happens is then the violations that occur create these liabilities and obligations that someone has to meet, right? And the first person they're going to look at meeting those is going to be, in this case, sort of the respondent, right, or the person responsible. So restorative justice, we're going to seek to heal the wrongs that have happened and move forward, as I mentioned, in sort of this positive way. And it takes this idea that sort of like what one of us does affects the rest of us. So this traditional system, the questions that we're going to ask really are a few key things, right? So we're going to look at what law was violated, right? So what did this person do? Who violated that law? And then really, what do we do with them, right? What is the appropriate punishment or the appropriate sanction for that person? From a restorative justice framework, looking at that same conduct, we're going to ask a set of different questions. So the first thing we're going to ask is who has been harmed? Again, we're going to ask and feature the victim in this. Then we're going to sort of say, all right, so now we know who's been harmed, and that's sort of the victim and the community, and now we're going to ask how have they been harmed? Because that is going to inform all of our approach and all of our response. Because now when we know what the harms are, we can now seek to look at what can be done to repair that harm. And then also this last piece is who is responsible for repairing that harm. And this actually implicates sort of a broader picture, because there are going to be some harms that occur that a respondent can address. Like there may be needs that a victim has that a respondent can directly address. And so that's where we bring in sort of the community element that works to seek to meet both victim and community needs to help sort of itself and to help each other. Okay? And so through our peacemakers, that's where we come up with both the creative agreements and the repair harm agreements, but also that sense of like how through these community peacemakers and human services can we seek to meet the needs of each individual involved more fully. We will often speak about this idea of the ripple effect. And very simply, it's this idea that harm spreads throughout a community. So you could again sort of take thinking like a pebble that's sort of dropped in a puddle, and just sort of you have these expanding ripples that exist after a crime occurs. So right at the center, you'll have that person responsible and you'll have that direct victim. But they're not going to be the only person affected when a crime occurs. So every person is going to have all these other people sort of around them who are impacted when a crime occurs. So you have all of these indirect or secondary victims. So we think about that, and that's going to be that person's family, right? That person's, again, parents, children, siblings, other people directly around them, as well as spreading out to their communities. The second piece is that ripples don't just exist one way, right? So they exist both ways around both parties. So the same circles that exist around that victim also exist around the person responsible for that crime, right? They also have family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, other people that they encounter. So getting people to think about their behavior and their actions and getting them to think about how this crime didn't just affect them, and how the system affects them, but also how does it affect all those people sort of around you, and how does it affect the people around the other side of this crime. When we look at comparing individuals who go through restorative process and compare those to individuals who go through a traditional justice process for the same crime and controlling for as many factors as possible, what we actually see is about a 30 to 50% reduction in recidivism generally for individuals. So I think three really important things, right? So you see a really large general overall reduction in recidivism. Then it takes people who do recidivate longer to do so, and then when they do so, it's less serious crimes. All three of those are really important points when we think about talking about recidivism and the effectiveness of restorative justice. This next piece about restitution, which is something that's very important to victims, what we see is about an average of 25 to 50% greater likelihood that someone fully satisfies their restitution order, right? Because these are voluntary agreements that you're engaging in. Think about it in your own life. Are you more likely to do something that you have agreed to do and taken part in sort of crafting that agreement, or something that you are told to do, right? So you can get a lot of people who might, again, feel disenfranchised from the justice process as well as sort of persecuted by it. Like again, having them, a judge telling, and you will pay $600. Very different than, yes, I agreed to pay $600, right? Just sort of thinking about that. And also, when we pair in the collateral consequences elements, if they're able to have sort of a job and maintain employment, that idea of them being able to pay restitution also increases greatly. I'll move quickly to satisfaction and fairness. And what we've seen in some larger studies is that there is substantially increased overall satisfaction with the process, but also looking at elements of fairness. And so both victims and offenders have reported that they felt that, for those who've experienced it in both systems, that going through restorative process was both more procedurally fair as well as outcome fairness, right? They feel that the outcome, again, victims have felt the outcome in these cases are more fair. Why? Because they're involved right away. They get to help craft the terms of what this agreement is. We're looking to meet their needs. A related piece is around accountability. And these same individuals also said, with about a 2/3 likelihood in increased likelihood, so about 66%, felt that there was greater accountability in a restorative process. Because again, think about this. You got to sit down with that person that you've harmed. You have to answer their questions. You got to be directly accountable to them and to the community. And when they looked at it, 92% of offenders said that they were held more accountable in a restorative process where they actually had to do something versus never having to answer questions, sort of sitting behind their lawyer, continuing to deny responsibility, continuing to minimize, mitigate things, and sort of deny their conduct, which is really encouraged in our current system, because that's sort of set up with the adversarial nature, right? Sort of the defense's job is to minimize exposure for their clients. It's not about getting them to take responsibility or accountability for what has happened. So, thinking about what people need to experience justice, and we think about crime victims. So the first thing that crime victims need is answers. Most of the time, the person with those answers is the person who committed that crime, right? The things that they want to know about, only the person who has committed that crime can answer. You think about a traditional justice response, the court process, you have more than 90% or approximately 90+% that result in plea, okay? So where the person doesn't go to trial, doesn't testify. Then when you look at the individuals who do go to trial, you have only a percentage of those that take the stand. And when they do, it's not to say, here's what I did and why. It's to say, I didn't do this, I wasn't there, you got the wrong person. None of those things are very satisfying to victims. And so when we think about this process, it is all about getting victims' questions answered and helping them move forward and sort of reorder their life. Next piece about compensation through restitution, an opportunity to talk about the impact of the crime is very important for people. Empowering them, which again, they're given direct voice in this process, both to participate in the way that they deem appropriate for them, as well as influencing the outcome. And then safety, and then finally this last piece, and this is important when we think about this process, is having access to services and resources. It's important that we have open the same elements that are open to respondents or offenders. Are open to victims, right? So you might have someone say, okay, well here's a program that responds just to offenders or just to respondents and says, oh, you have educational needs, housing, employment, those are your needs and we're gonna sort of address those because we don't want you to commit more crimes. But a victim says, well, what about me? Right, so we want to make sure that the process itself is open to providing some of those same opportunities to victims that is provided to the individuals who is responsible for that harm.
I'm going to start out with just a quick overview of what I see as the benefit for restorative justice is twofold. It gives victims a real voice within our criminal justice system. The traditional system, victims were there, they were present, they're needed to testify, but it never required the defendant to accept responsibility. It never required the defendant to say a word. We could go through a trial, we could convict them, we could have the judge sentence them, we could take a pound of flesh, and the defendant could still sit there and never have uttered a word, because that's our system, right? Wow. They are not needed, and frankly, it's their right not to say anything. They don't have to contribute to our ability to prove that they did it. That's the traditional system. And in that, the victim would have an ability to say something at the very end. Now, think about this. Wisconsin actually does have a real strong history of supporting victims. All right, we are the first state in the nation to actually have a Victims' Bill of Rights. It's outlined in Chapter 950 of our statutes for adults and juveniles. All right, which means that we as prosecutors have to confer, we have to let victims know what's happening, what the court is scheduling, what to expect. We actually talk to them about what we are going to offer. Okay, so that's our traditional system. The reason restorative justice works so well is I believe it creates empathy. It creates empathy not just with the offender, but also with the victim and with those surrounding. And when we feel and we can connect with someone else, do we want to cause them pain? Do we want to hurt them? A lot of times what we're dealing with youthful offenders might not even have a specific victim. And that's why we've looked and tried to get peacemakers from all over the community, all different walks of life, so that they can have a voice as the community, as to what this harm has done to the community. Because victims may not want to participate. Yeah. Okay? So the biggest thing of what we do in giving the victims the voice, at least for this, we ask them, are you okay with this track? And we're asking them because if they say no, we won't send a case to the CRC. Okay? So we try and do it before we actually issue a charge, because that's the biggest benefit to the participant. And what we've found through our victim witness unit, who are for the most part all senior social workers, that victims really want to understand why them.
Yes.
Right? Was this completely random? Did you pick me out for some reason? Was it something I did? Was I wearing the wrong color? Was I, just somewhere, just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? They want us to repair the harm. So if they had a loss, hopefully get that loss back for them, and do something to ensure that this doesn't happen to somebody else. For the most part, that is what victims across the board want. We basically, for 17 to 25-year-olds, review every single case, okay? This system was set up because I said I couldn't give you the attorneys or the paralegals, right? I envisioned this system being law enforcement, identify the case, send it to the CRC. Don't even send it to us. Doesn't even come into the system. We are not there yet because law enforcement was not comfortable with sending cases that were criminal in nature there. They are getting there, okay? We have 22 agencies operating in Dane County. We do not have 22 agencies signed on an MOU. The county exec and others have said we want this to be a county-wide program. I am not going to send a case to the CRC if there is no one in a community who can sit in a circle. Okay? I am not going to have Stoughton have their repair harm agreement created by people in Madison. That's a recipe for disaster. I don't have a problem if people from Madison are in that circle, and they may need to be in that circle, but I need someone from Stoughton. I need the community invested in this process. And I think what we have seen through these cases that go is when that happens, that ripple effect from that original offense gets hit with an even bigger ripple effect from the process. And people actually start growing. And they start seeing, wait a minute, I could have helped this person well before this. Why didn't I get the opportunity? They start thinking outside the box. They start actually looking for different solutions. We've actually created some diversion programs, right? We've had the Deferred Prosecution Unit in Dane County for more than 20 plus years, okay? We created a restorative justice program specifically around excessive corporal punishment with parents, right? This is why I also connected to our no-hit zones and our positive parenting, trying to get in front of systems, trying to keep people out of the system, looking at that. So we had some experience with creating programs. When we created this program, in my mind, the biggest fear is that we would not support it enough and that it would crumble because we would ask it to do too much, too fast, and if we don't have adequate resources, we can't connect individuals to resources fast enough. We don't have time for a 17 to 25-year-old to languish in line for 2, 4, 6 weeks before we connect them to a circle. We don't have time for the community to have this 17 to 25-year-old commit more crimes and then say the program doesn't work. And we need enough of a track record within this community so that when that 17 to 25-year-old does create another crime after going in or being in the program, that the community says, you know what, that's human nature, that's going to happen. We're going to have these bumps. But we can see the lay of the land and we can see the benefits and we can see how many lives have been changed. That is what we need for survival. So Ron and company, they want me to expand as fast as possible. And I've pushed back and I've said, we're not going there yet. And I've said to them, I believe you can do it, right? I have sent felony level cases that you would have never imagined going there to the CRC. But that was because I was certain they had enough resources to handle those more complex cases. And I pushed the county because we intentionally did not place this program within my office or within the court system. Why? Because we wanted that break from the traditional system. They are within human services. But historically, human services has said, we're going to create a program, we'll create a wait list, we'll then go in and ask because we have now proven that we have more need for resources, and therefore, next year or the year after, we'll get another person, and I'm like, it can't happen that way. Right now, if law enforcement fully bought into this program, it would be overrun. period. When we looked into the pilot, we saw at any given day, the city of Madison had 2,000 plus 17 to 25-year-olds coming into the system for offenses that looked like they'd be eligible or good candidates for the CRC. So the city of Madison said, yes, 2,000 misdemeanor cases come to you, Ron. When would you get out from under that? When would you get even 3/4 of those people through, right? This is the problem that we have. So I've asked that it move slow because I cannot have this system fail. Once we actually have support in the community, once law enforcement is bought in, I think they will need twice as many resources as they have now, and that might be enough to cover the county. Might be. I think once we actually see this firing on all cylinders, not that it isn't now, but I mean countywide, actually having buy-in from every community and law enforcement and really taking advantage of this, we will be a statewide model, possibly a national model. All right, and then, not just then, hopefully before that, we will actually be able to talk about expansion. This is why we have drug court. That's why we have veterans court. That's why we have OWI court. We are doing alternatives in this community because they work, but in order for them to work, the systems must be able to support each other.
Right.
So if someone fails out of drug court, I actually have to get up and support the judge sitting on top of drug court and say, this is why we are looking at this. You know, we have a sheriff who has been committed to reducing our jail population and putting more people in the community on house arrest. When he first did that, you would not believe the uproar in the courthouse. Judges were saying, "You go, what? I said they should go to jail. What does the sheriff think he's doing?" Well, the statute actually says the sheriff gets to determine what jail is, whether it's in his jail or in their home. That's the statute. But the judges lost their minds. So we try and do that as quickly as possible so that we can keep people out of the system. Once they have a bail hearing, once they go into the court system, now there is something someone can track. Luckily, the courts have now said after 2 years they are going to wipe those dismissals off the records. They still will exist, you just won't see them publicly, so that everyone is being more conscious about the impact of information in the systems. So yeah, why I support it? Because I truly believe that when we create empathy, we actually make ourselves safer. We actually get in front of these problems, and that's what I think really impacts recidivism. And I don't think people talk about that enough. And for us to be able to do that, we actually need to figure out how to take violence out of our communities. We actually have to figure out how to make ourselves safer in general. So, on you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ish. Bring us home.
Okay, right. So I'm going to go through a few of the statistics of CRC, right? We'll take a look at some of the numbers. And what I will tell you is that the program has been around for 5 years, and when we first received a referral, it was in 2015. And we received 14 referrals that year. In 2016, it was 35 referrals. And then in 2017, it was 100. We doubled the following year with 205, and then this year in 2019, we have received 370 referrals. We are growing fast. So if you break it down from July 2015 to August of 2019, you can see that the Madison Police Department and the District Attorney's Office are our main referral sources. The Madison Police Department, along with the other law enforcement agencies, are making municipal ticket referrals, and then the District Attorney's Office is making mostly misdemeanor referrals and then just a couple of felony cases. Who needs a second chance? Obviously, our 17-year-olds in Dane County need a second chance. They are our largest referral source. You have heard people throughout this conference refer to the Race to Equity report. You heard Emma Adams talk about it, you heard the district attorney talk about it, and that was one of the reasons that this program was launched, to address the racial disparities within Dane County. So you can see that we are serving more people of color than whites. We are serving more men than women. And here is a snapshot of the offenses that we have received. Disorderly conduct. right, is the largest referral source. Then with retail theft, we collect data exactly as it comes in, right? So whatever is on the referral as far as the offense, the charge, that is how we're going to document it. The district attorney's office is able to send any referral, right, at their discretion. And we talk a lot about having MOUs with law enforcement agencies and having our peacemakers represented in the communities. So some of these communities that have not signed our MOU, for example, Verona, McFarland, they haven't signed it yet, but yet we have peacemakers in those communities. They have participated in our training. So we have peacemakers all throughout Dane County. So what I can tell you about the overall success rate of CRC is it's at about 92%. The way that we define success is that we have somebody that comes in for an intake, and I'm going to go through all the procedures in much more detail after this slide. But somebody comes in for their intake with us. We then schedule the restorative justice circle, and in that circle process is where we come up with a contract, also known as a repair harm agreement, right? And it is what the respondent needs to do in order to successfully complete the program. And so 92% of our respondents have successfully completed their repair harm agreement. Once they successfully complete, then their case is closed with our unit along with the district attorney's office and or the law enforcement agency. If somebody does not complete their repair harm agreement, they go back to the traditional system. We are basically a detour for the traditional system. We're not trying to replace the traditional system. There is a need for it. So if somebody doesn't complete, then they just go back to the referring agency and continue through the process. We do not accept people that don't accept responsibility, right, for their actions. They need to be held accountable. They need to own their behavior. And in particular for the victim, right? The victim needs to know that that person isn't walking away saying, nope, I didn't do it. Excuse me, it wasn't me, but rather we want to make sure that they understand the impact of their actions. So CRC is for 17 to 25-year-olds, and then we accept cases, battery, disorderly conduct, obstructing, theft, criminal damage to property. And we will not accept somebody if they have a severe criminal record. So the intake process, we call in the respondent, right? And we meet with them 1, 2, 3 times. We are looking for extensive information and extensive history with this respondent. We want to know what's going on with them, what led them to the criminal justice system, what happened to them in their family, in their childhood, and we want to be able to address those issues, right? We want to be able to support them. We want to be able to offer them resources. We want to listen to them and what's going on, right? And so then once we have a better understanding of what led the person to the criminal justice system, then we're going to start to establish some resources. Okay, we do a complete social history interview with them. We also do a needs assessment with them too. You know, for example, we will get a police report, and the police report will read one way, but then when you're meeting with a human being, right, you get the full story. I will talk more about the circle process and the peacemakers, but one of my favorite parts about this program is that we get to hand select every peacemaker, right? And so then all 300 of them, and we are thinking about which peacemaker will be able to make a connection, which peacemaker will be able to offer some resources, which peacemaker is a part of that person's community, right, that can then represent the community. So we're also seeing a lack of family connection. People do not have that connection with their family, and they don't know who to reach out to. They don't know who to contact, right? And so then they are maybe connecting with the wrong peer group and committing offenses. We also see chronic abuse and neglect, right? And people aren't connected to their community resources. We often hear about how rich Dane County is in our resources. But how do we connect with those? So fortunately, CRC is actually working with a number of counseling agencies as well as alcohol and drug therapists, psychologists, that we can directly refer our respondent and or victim to receive services, and then CRC is able to provide payment for that. So if we're offering all of these services to our respondents, we also want to offer them to our victim. This program cannot exist without the input and information from our victims, right? So we contact all victims, whether it's a municipal ticket or whether it is a misdemeanor, right? To find out what happened to them. What do they need? What are they going through? And how can we help repair that harm? So ideally, we want them to come into our office so that we can process the incident with them, right? To hear exactly what they need. If they do not want to come into the office, we understand that. Again, we're not here to bully victims and make them participate in our program, but whatever they feel comfortable with. And so we offer them to either share information with us over the phone or in an email or in a letter about how they were harmed and what they need in order to feel whole. Or they can come to the circle and sit across from the respondent. Or they can send a support person or a surrogate in order to participate in that circle process. So we talk about the power of our community members and our trained peacemakers. We can't speak enough about this process and what they bring to the circle. I just provided you with an example. We do 3 to 4 trainings. If you're interested, please contact me. We would love to have you participate in training. We have over 250, 300 people trained, and we do background checks on everybody that participates in this process. So our community members, we expect them to represent the community. We expect them to have a voice in the circle. They are allowed to ask the respondent and the victim questions that they may have that they also want answered about this crime, about this event. But we also want them to hold the respondent accountable for their actions. And we also want them to support the victim in that process too. This is not a process where we're looking to shame people or embarrass them, make them feel terrible. Rather, we want them to know that community members do support them, all right? We do want them to live a productive life and not be involved in the criminal justice system. And people walk away feeling like they're really cared for, right? That people, they're showing empathy for the offender as well as the victim. So we sit in a circle. Can you imagine, like, a victim and a respondent sitting across from each other, right? And the victim is able to share their experience and what they felt and what they went through. Like Ish talked about empathy, right? And that respondent is able to develop some empathy for this person and hear what they went through. You know, we talked about restitution. Well, if the victim is saying, I'm not able to pay my rent, I'm not able to buy groceries for my kids, I need that $600. Okay, the respondent is more likely to pay. So in the process, CRC facilitates it, and then we have the respondent, and they're allowed to bring a support person, whether that's a parent, a therapist, a CCS worker, a teacher, whoever it may be, the victim and their support person, our trained peacemakers, and then our primary officer in our resisting cases. So the repair harm agreement. Ideally, we need to hear from the victim. I can't stress that enough. What does the victim need? What do they want the respondent to do? Whether it's restitution, whether it's to answer some questions, whether it's to, not go to the gym where they are. And we are as creative as we need to be. So we may have somebody participate alcohol and drug assessment, follow recommendations, AA meetings, write reflection papers, meet with law enforcement officers. Ideally, the victim is the one who is creating that repair harm agreement. We had one victim who wanted the respondent to answer specific essay questions that he wrote himself, and then he also wanted him to volunteer at a specific site for community service where he was making an impact on children of color. So then the closing process, we have a debriefing with all of our peacemakers after Circle because we are hearing some really devastating stories from people, right? And so then we want to make sure that we're touching base with our peacemakers afterwards. And we're always trying to improve our program too. So we have peacemakers, victims, and respondents complete surveys after this process. We also heard from law enforcement, and they wanted to know what happens to somebody after they're referred to CRC. And so we are sending out closing letters and information to all law enforcement officers. And then, of course, we share with every agency that sent us the referral, the closing process. So we've gone through a number of the benefits of CRC, but we really make connections with people, right? We want to understand what's going on with them. And they're, people are going to know whether you're genuine or not and whether you're authentic, And so if you're trying to move somebody through an intake, through the system, through the circle process, they're going to pick up on that and they're not going to make any changes. But if they're able to feel that you care and that you're concerned and you truly want to help them and assist them, right, then maybe they're going to make some changes. So if we had time, I would have everybody get in a big circle, right? And then I'd want you all to share the worst thing that you've ever done in your life, right? Because that's what we ask respondents to do, right? To tell strangers what's the worst thing that they've ever done in their life. So, thank you.